to the fourth grader, the fifth grader is a genius. You only need to be one step ahead of where your market is in the learner's journey. And in many ways, you're actually more valuable when you're one step ahead. The thing that holds most people back is they're afraid to give up good in order to get great.
Hey there, it's Daniel Priestley, and today I'm with Ryan Levesque, my new business partner. As you may have heard, Ryan and I have brought our businesses together. So Bucket.io and ScoreApp have joined forces. We're going forward as ScoreApp.com. And actually, strangely, this is one of the first times we're in the same room together. So I wanted to introduce you to Ryan, and I wanted to have a conversation, have a chat with Ryan, and just kind of give you a little bit of a background to the man, the myth, the legend. I'm probably going to be learning some stuff as well. Over the last 6 weeks, we've been having a lot of Zoom calls together, and we've been hashing out a deal and bringing those businesses together. So this is a good opportunity to just talk a little bit differently about how you came to Bucket.io and like how you come to your way of thinking. So for those of you who don't know, Ryan, best-selling author, New York Times bestselling author of Ask, and someone who's spoken all over the world on buying psychology and marketing and innovation around marketing. So let's get to know you a little bit. Tell me, how is it that you geek out on marketing? Why have you wrapped your brain around this topic of buying psychology and marketing?
It's a great question. First, it's awesome to be here. It's surreal in many ways because you and I have had so many conversations over WhatsApp and Zoom, and just to be together like this in person, it's always funny like this. It's a great question. So I've always been fascinated with the human brain. And when I was at university, I was studying neuroscience. So I was actually studying to become a doctor, to become a neurosurgeon, and on that path. And along the way, I realized that what I was far more fascinated in was applied neuroscience, applied psychology. And that took me down this path of first working on Wall Street and understanding the psychology of markets and investing, later traveling to China and understanding the psychology and differences of culture around language acquisition and how to communicate with people, the nuance of language and how that actually applies. And that eventually led me to start my very first business in a tiny, random, obscure niche market, which was my first sort of attempt at applied psychology.
What was the business?
The first business, it's almost embarrassing to say this, but this is the truth, was selling ebooks teaching people how to make Scrabble tile jewelry.
Okay, massive market. This was going to be the next Facebook.
This is the next Facebook. It was one of these things where we were living in Hong Kong at the time. My wife and I were in Hong Kong, and she came across this jewelry. And this jewelry was selling like bananas. It was jewelry that's made using Scrabble tiles, like the game, with origami paper and resin. So you can just imagine it looks like these tiles. And so the jewelry was selling like crazy. And at the time, we're thinking about starting a business. And the argument was, well, look, we're in China. We have access to all the origami paper in the world. We could set up a factory in southern China, and we could just like export this.
What year was this?
This was in 2007.
2007.
Yeah.
So that's a fascinating time, because that's a time where people started to realize that these crazy tiny little niche markets could actually become big global businesses, and that they could actually have a global trend or something like that. So it's actually not surprising to me to hear that that felt exciting at the time, because in a geographically locked world where you can only sell to people geographically close, that's not a great opportunity. But in a world where 2 billion people have fast internet access, there probably are millions of people who want to make origami tiles.
Well, the fascinating thing of it was this. So 2007 was when a tiny little website emerged on the internet called Etsy.com. And Etsy, this was a fad in that ecosystem. And so we kind of like explored that possibility and then realized like that's not what we want to do. We want to build a location-independent business, a business that allows us to travel around the world, and a business that's high in margin. So we kind of nixed the idea. And then a few weeks later, my wife came back to me. She said, hey, look at this woman and what she's selling on Etsy. She's not selling the jewelry. She's teaching people how to make the jewelry. And at the time, Etsy would tell you how many sales someone was making. So you could actually reverse engineer a business's income just by looking at how many sales they're making on a daily basis. And this woman was making 20, 25 sales a day of this $20, $30 tutorial that was basically a Microsoft Word document, an ebook that she created, and she's making $500, $600 a day in profit.
So you jumped straight to the realization that intellectual property would scale.
Intellectual property would scale. So we basically created a better mousetrap, and we created it. My wife learned how to make the jewelry.
At this point, would you have considered yourself to be an entrepreneur or like a corporate mindset? Did you grow up in an entrepreneurial family?
So interestingly enough, I grew up very, what we'd say in America, blue-collar background. So first in my family, I go to university. My dad was a shipping clerk, worked for the U.S. Postal Service, basically loading boxes on the back of a truck, worked nights his entire life. My mom was a one-person solopreneur. She had her own hair salon. So my parents converted a bathroom in our house, it's as small as it sounds, into a one-chair hair salon. and
Amazing.
people would come to our house to get their haircuts. So I learned the sort of values of being an entrepreneur and self-employed and the freedom that provides, but had this tension of a father who was a union employee working for a massive government organization and having this message drilled into my head: go for stability, go after a stable.
You got to have a stable government behind you and all this sort of stuff.
All of these things, you know, so it was a very interesting, I think, environment to have to unlearn some of the fear around taking a risk and betting on yourself. But at the same time, seeing that example of my mom who took a small risk and decided to build a very small business.
Jumping around a little bit. When you're on Wall Street for a brief period, what was the number one insight that you had around psychology? Buying psychology or the psychology of markets?
So when I was 10 years old, both of my grandparents passed away, and they didn't have a lot of money, they didn't have a lot of wealth, but they left each, my sister and I, $5,000 each. And we could do anything with that $5,000. And at 10 years old, I decided to invest the $5,000 in the stock market.
Very mature.
Yeah, and this was 1992. So I invested in 1992, and I had the S&P big books, like the big physical books with all the tear sheets in them. And I read all the Peter Lynch books around investing in and so long story short, I invested in the stock market, transformed $5,000 into about $100,000 by 2000, which is when I enrolled in university. So in that 8-year stretch.
Amazing.
And what I learned in that process was the fact, and this is one of the reasons I was inspired to work on Wall Street, is that a lot of what I did was just luck. It was all timing.
Good timing, yeah.
Good timing. I mean, the run up to the dot-com boom, and just sold at the right time because that's when I needed the money to pay for my college tuition. So it could not have been timed any more perfectly. I learned that, at the time I thought I was, brilliant for doing this, but the reality is that it was all based on timing. So my time on Wall Street, I think what I really learned is that we need to be a student of markets. Markets follow predictable cycles. And if you can understand where we are in a market cycle, then you can make decisions around that. Do you invest and go all in? Do you keep your cash on the sidelines just based on that experience alone? So there's an entire book there, but that's a snippet.
Well, I mean, it's that Wall Street psychology it's a lot of transferable stuff to small business, and people don't realize fear, greed, the erratic nature of markets. The biggest insight I had very early on in my career, I worked with a trader, and I was basically helping him to launch a product, and I was on his marketing side of things, and I was trying to get content out of him. And I said, explain why markets go up. And he said, well, because there's more buyers than sellers. And explain why markets come down. There's more sellers than buyers. And he actually said to me, there are companies that have great CEOs and great products and great everything, but if there's more sellers than buyers on the stock goes down. I remember that just sticking in my head, that this whole idea that the only reason something goes up is more buyers than sellers. And then when I launched a series of businesses myself, it was basically this driving thing of like, I've got to get more buyers. I've got to get oversubscribed, which I ended up writing a book on. But, but it was the seed of that was planted in a trading example on the stock market.
Yeah, and it's so true. It's like you find the market where there's more demand, and then like I wrote my second book, Choose, was on 5 market must-haves. And so like for example, Scrabble tile jewelry market, that was a fad. That market, I made $1,000, then I made $2,000 a month, and $3,000 a month, and $8,000 a month. I thought I'm gonna get rich first time, and then you may have not heard the global market crash for Scrabble tile jewelry. And it disappeared overnight. But I learned the importance of getting into an evergreen market. So being in a market that's not here today, gone tomorrow, like the Scrabble tile jewelry market, that was a fad. That just was like
just a fun thing that you spotted.
It was there for a minute and then just disappeared. That's why we're laughing about it now, years and years later.
What was the next big opportunity that you spotted?
So because of that experience, I decided I'm going to find a market that's an evergreen market. That's not going to go away overnight. And when we lived in Asia, one of the things many things that happened in my life is we lived in Shanghai, high-rise apartment, and in the middle of the city, and I bought a bunch of orchids for my wife to kind of add some greenery into the apartment. About 3 days later, they all died. Like all the flowers fell up, they all died. And it just kind of stuck in my head, like, what did I do wrong? We spent all this money on all these flowers, we had to throw them away. It was just like, what did we do? And years later, when I was thinking about what market to go into, and I was making this big long list after the Scrabble tie experience, I thought, okay, what are the oldest, longest lasting hobbies? And there are 2 of them. There are 2 hobbies that have been the number 1 or the number 2 hobby in America, at least, for 100 years. Number 1's reading, and number 2's gardening.
Okay.
And it's been true for 100 years. So I thought, well, these are markets that are going to be around. They're going to be around 10 years from now. So I found a niche in the gardening market, which is orchid care. And this is the first market that led me to the power of segmentation, the power of asking. So I went into this market. I knew nothing about this market other than being an idiot, a student who had just failed in this market, killed a bunch of orchids. And so I came in with this beginner's mind. I had no preconceived notions of what this market actually wanted. And what I found was that in this market, there are 4 different buckets. There are people who are looking for the basics of orchid care. Like they're given an orchid as a gift and they say, I don't know how to water it, how much.
The beginners, the newbies.
The silly beginners, yeah, exactly. Number 2 are people who have an orchid with the blooms that fall off. They buy an orchid, and orchids will live forever. Orchids will live for hundreds of years if you take care of them, but the blooms fall off and they can show signs of sickness. So they don't know what to do when the blooms fall off. Number 3 is repotting a plant. So orchids that need to be repotted into a bigger pot. And number 4 is I've got a sick or dying orchid and I don't know what to do about it. So 4 different buckets. And when I learned about this, I created my first little quiz on an orchid site called Orchids Made Easy, which asks people, what's your biggest challenge right now? And based on the bucket that they signed up for, they got a custom email
content.
They got a custom sales page for the book that we had written, Orchids Made Easy, that just focused on the chapters of the book that solved their problem. We had different follow-on products and services that helped address those needs. And it was only when I made that shift to put people into 4 different buckets that the business took off. And we built a business in the orchid space that was a very high 6-figure business. We built different courses for Paphiopedilum and Phalaenopsis and Cymbidium and just all the different
You
orchid
still have all this underlying orchid knowledge.
Yeah,
I love that.
exactly. Just from being a student of that market.
Yeah.
And I learned an important lesson in that market. And it's something that one of my mentors told me. And this may not translate to UK English, but it'll make sense in American English. It's to the 4th grader, the 5th grader is a genius. You only need to be 1 step ahead of where your market is in the learner's journey. And in many ways, you're actually more valuable when you're 1 step ahead. Because I wasn't a PhD horticulturalist. I didn't have that level of knowledge. I was just a learner trying to stay 1 step ahead and teaching other learners what I was experiencing.
That's a really important point, because a lot of people think you have to have completed the journey. I was recently on this podcast, which is a big podcast called Diary of a CEO, and he said that some of the business guests who they've had on the show have not actually done very well because they're billionaires and people can't relate. So it's like the founder of Spotify, the founder of Airbnb, who have built tens of billions of dollars worth of businesses. And they've only got a few 100,000 views, and then little old me comes on, who's only a couple of steps ahead, and I get 3 million views. And he said, oh, it's because you're closer in the journey than they are. They can relate better. So, and I actually have kids in primary school, so that example totally makes sense. My 10-year-old is a genius to my 7-year-old. Like complete genius. So
and we forget that. We discount our knowledge, and we think, to your point, that we have to have that level of expertise before we can actually add value.
So in this example, you discovered hyper-personalization, hyper-targeting, and that decision tree of like, which bucket do you fit in, and then which knowledge should I give you? So you discover this trend I'm guessing about 5 or 6 years before it becomes a super important trend in the mid-teens. But later on, you end up using this knowledge to build 9-figure businesses.
Totally, yeah. So the journey was, I did it in that business, and I thought, okay, well, I don't want to put all my eggs in one basket. Like I had the experience of losing everything with the Scrabble business, so I want to go into the next market. And at the time, my vision was, I'm going to build a $10 million business by going into 20 different $500,000 niches.
Interesting.
And so did it in orchid care, and then I replicated this success again in the memory improvement space. I built a brand called Rocket Memory to improve your memory. So that was kind of me using my university degree, making my parents happy. Why did you leave your job as an investment banker and in finance to sell orchid ebooks on the internet?
So your parents must have been very confused.
Everyone just, what are you doing? You're throwing away your life.
One minute you're a brain surgeon, and then I'm all straight.
It was neurosurgery to investment banking to finance in China to like ebooks on the internet
and Scrabble tile jewelry.
Exactly. It was a big fall, But what I learned along the way is, when you have people in your life that show up that say, "What are you doing? You must be crazy." That's when you're onto something.
Interesting.
It's the moments that people are afraid to go after.
Are you saying it's the combination of you feeling excited with other people saying you're crazy?
I think so.
Because you need that kind of like, you're seeing something that no one else is seeing. You're seeing a playbook that other people are missing.
Exactly. They're not seeing the opportunity. And I think, and I've said this before, but I think the thing that holds most people back is they're afraid to give up good in order to get great. Most people have a good life.
Yeah.
Things are okay. Things are fine. It's the fear of giving that up to go after something much greater that holds people back.
That's a superpower of yours, because most people wouldn't have given up some of the things that you,
the high salary, the status, and all these things to, you know, to go to the bottom
or something.
Yeah.
But you were exploring without perhaps knowing it, you were exploring extremely on-trend playbooks. That very few people were exploring at the time because it was in its infancy. But you were hyper-personalization, geographical, unlimited businesses, scaling intellectual property, like all of those trends were in their infancy.
Totally.
And what looked like orchids and Scrabble tiles was actually, how do we take intellectual property, develop a playbook, scale it, have a business that's high margin, that's infinitely scalable, that taps into a niche.
And what I found along the way, this is an important lesson, Daniel, that I learned, was that I became dispassionate about the subject matter and passionate about the process.
The playbook.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's what holds a lot of people back, is we have such a personal tie to what it is that we are focused on in the business, that we lose sight of the fact that it's the playbook itself, in your words, that is the most important. So did it again in market after market after market. And long story short, big businesses started to find out what I was doing. I started speaking a little bit about what I was doing, talking a little bit about this, and the couple notable examples to share with you. So had a big business in the golf instruction market that came up to me, that learned about what I was doing and asked, like, can you apply this hyper personalization? Now I started taking it to an entirely new level based on the experience that I had in the orchid market and the memory market, and I went to the fish oil supplement market. I went to 23 different markets. And so they came to me and said, could we partner together? Could you do this in our business? And I said, well, I've never done this before, but let's try it. Long story short, we built an audience of over 10 million golfers in the golf market using a series of these quizzes.
Of buckets.
So we built a quiz to help assess what's the single biggest mistake you're making in your golf swing. We call them death moves, 10 of them. And by asking a few questions, we could actually assess someone's golf swing just right from the comfort of their home, and we could identify not only what they're doing wrong, but what they should do about it.
Every golfer, as soon as they see that as a concept, they're gonna.
It was exactly.
I have to answer that quiz.
And we syndicated. We had death moves. We had swing killers, power killers.
Swing killers.
Yeah, we had all these different variants of this assessment. Built an audience of over 10 million golfers. Massively successful business, and it was acquired by NBC, the TV studio, and the Golf Channel. For 9 figures.
Well, because the data is so valuable.
That's what I learned.
Because if you've got millions of golfers who are probably very successful people, and you've got all this data about each one of them,
exactly,
that's a very valuable database. So it was acquired for 9 figures, which is $100 million.
Over $100 million.
Wow.
And part of it is the database of golfers, all these data points, because we knew how far someone could hit the golf ball. We knew obviously their gender, their age, biggest frustration, how often they played. We knew how all the psychographic and demographic information that we had acquired along the way, not to mention being able to monetize those buyers.
Just the basic of the fact that they're passionate enough to answer a quiz, that this is something that means something to them.
Absolutely, yeah. So that was the first one. The second one came around in the business funding space. So similarly, again, a business approached me, had the opportunity to work together to build an assessment to help identify what form of business funding is right for your business. And we used it to connect entrepreneurs and business owners with the right source of business funding for them. We built that into a product called Loan Builder, and that led to an acquisition by PayPal for over $180 million.
Get out.
Because PayPal wanted to not only have access to the data and the basically the structure that we had put in place to use that to grow their products.
This data and these quizzes, they really build valuable businesses.
Super valuable. And that's when I kind of learned I was onto something. And then around that time, I was working really hard. And I was thinking about you the other day. A lot of travel, a lot of just on the road, doing a lot of work. And I applied for life insurance. And my first son was 6 months old. And I got my life insurance application back. And the application came back denied.
No.
And the only way your life insurance application comes back denied is if it's something
they think you're too much of a risk.
Pretty big deal.
Yeah.
So the agent says, look, I'm not a doctor, but here are your results. I think you should go see a doctor. And I, at the time, thought my results got mixed up with somebody else's.
Yeah.
So I went to the doctor's office. Next day, my wife was kind of getting concerned. Told the doctor situation. He says, get some labs done, wait in the waiting room. I'll come back ASAP, stat. Comes back, grabs me by the shoulders. He says, Mr. Levesque, you should be in a coma right now. We have to rush you to the emergency room. Rush me to emergency room. I spent the next 10 days in ICU, intensive care. My kidneys were shutting down, liver was shutting down, and my pancreas stopped working. Long story short, I had slipped into a state called DKA, diabetic ketoacidosis. And as a male in my 30s, I found out that I was an undiagnosed juvenile diabetic and that my body was shutting down. And that was the wake-up call for me, that like doing all these different businesses, 23 different markets, trying to do all these different things. Yeah, it was just
you
like a
came
wake-up
onto it,
call.
yeah.
That was too much. And I decided to make a shift and said, all right, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to stop doing all that work and I'm going to focus on one thing, and that is I'm going to teach what it is that I've learned. And I wrote a book, Ask, in 2014, and the book came out, became the #1 best-selling book in the country. And it was launched around the same time that Malcolm Gladwell launched one of his books, and his book was #2, and Ask was #1, which was like, Malcolm Gladwell was one of my heroes.
Yeah,
you know? So
yeah.
it's just, and little old me, like, what happened? And it just
That's wild.
struck a chord.
That's so great.
And it was a book that told the story and the methodology of this process. And that served as the starting point of a business that we built into a 7-timing, 5,000 training education business. And when you start teaching people a methodology that's so powerful, one of the biggest questions everyone wants to know is, what's the technology? Like, what tool do I use?
How do I implement?
How do I implement all this? And that led us to build the technology business, Bucket, and build that into the business that we built it into. And
because what's interesting is, you talk about all these different verticals, from golf to lending, to flowers, to memory, to fish oil, all these different things. And people might think, oh, well, you're jumping around, but actually it's the underlying playbook that stays the same.
Exactly.
One thing I picked up on is that you're really good at coming up with these catchy little phrases that capture the attention. The swing killers, the dead, what was the dead one? The
death moves.
The death moves, and the ask method. So you're really good at coming up with a name or a conceptual, like just a conceptual catch-all that go, oh, I want to know more about that. So it's like putting the concept on a page, asking a series of questions, and then as a result of those questions, putting people into a segment and then giving them the content that relates to their segment. That simple idea relates to almost any business. Like
100%.
Between us, I think we've got 9,000 different companies that are basically using that simple playbook to grow their business.
Yeah.
Give me the ones that you've not done yourself, but someone you've heard about. Give me one or two of the ones that have stood out where someone's applied that playbook and it's impacted their business.
Noom.com.
Oh, Noom.
Noom's a client.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Noom.com.
Noom's huge.
They're massive.
Yeah.
They're on pace to be $1 billion corporation.
And their whole onboarding process is the quiz.
Entire onboarding process is a quiz. Yeah.
I had no idea that they were a client.
Yeah. I had a conversation with founder not that long ago, and
I wonder if that came from them reading the Ask method.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So Noom.com.
Great business.
Another one that comes to mind in the retirement planning space, I'm drawing a blank right now. It'll come to me. That's big in the retirement planning space. Basically, are you ready for retirement? Another one that comes to mind. Some of these are not necessarily ones that I was involved in myself, but some of the biggest examples of this are, if you think about the assessments that we've taken. You talked about the love languages. That's one, right? The love languages assessment. StrengthsFinders assessment. StrengthsFinders assessment is an assessment on the back of a consulting company. They've had over 10 million people take StrengthsFinders. Just think about the value of that database.
Yeah, massive.
The real age test. Almost 80 million people have taken the real age test.
Wow.
Basically determine what your body's real age is relative to your biological age in terms of what the calendar actually says. We could go on and on and on. And a lot of small examples too, just small little businesses. So I think of, we have a client in the publishing space, and she helps authors get published. And she has a quiz, what publishing path is right for you?
Oh, yeah,
do you
perfect.
self-publish? Do you do a vanity press? Do you do traditional? Do you use a ghostwriter? Do you write it yourself? Just all the decisions one has to create a custom plan that's right for you. So what I love so much about this conversation, what you do, what we do, how we've gotten together, is that it's timeless. Going back to human psychology, we're tapping into the power.
When is there ever going to be a time when people don't want to diagnose, assess, find the personalized shortcut for themselves? That is timeless.
It is absolutely timeless. If you, no matter what market you're in, the psychology of self-discovery is universally applicable. It doesn't matter what you sell, doesn't matter what service or product that you're offering here today. The single most important thing in any market, the thing that people care more about than anything else, is themselves.
Is personalization.
If you can tell me something about myself that I don't already know.
Interesting that your story, your life-saving story, was that you got a personalized test at the right time, and then you got your results, and then they said, based on your results, we can save your life. It's actually embedded in your story that framework actually was the life-saving framework.
I've never thought about that moment in terms of that lens, but you're absolutely right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now let's just finish this up. Something interesting about you is you've gone off grid. You live on a farm. You've gone from big cities, Hong Kong, Shanghai, New York, to living off grid, living on a farm. And I think a lot of people in the last few years have even thought about this as even just daydreaming, thought about what would it be like to live off grid, go on a farm, that sort of stuff. Tell me about that.
For me, I had a milestone birthday a few years ago and had this realization that I spent the first half of my life in front of a screen. And I asked myself, read a book, Second Mountain, great book. And I asked myself, second half of my life, the next 40 years of my life, where do I want to spend that life? Do I want to spend that life face in front of a screen, or do I want to spend that life with my hands in the dirt? And that was the epiphany for me, that I wanted to spend the second half of life with a bit more balance, to be closer to nature, to take my family on a great, grand adventure. And I've got 2 boys, and let them experience the journey of building a farm and everything that comes with that. And so what I find myself in here today is this interesting space where having a business that is location independent, that leverages scalable intellectual property, that uses the power of quiz funnels and other technology like this, enables us to live wherever we want. And so whether it's a farm in the mountains of Vermont, which is my dream, or living a life by the sea, or being able to travel around the world, or
have a bit of everything.
A bit of everything.
Because you can have your farm and also be here in London and give talk in front of a few hundred people.
That's what's amazing about it, is you can have it all. And so the message that I try to impart is, don't wait. There's never going to be a perfect time. You're always going to have a reason in your life to say no. You can always talk yourself out of something. But if it's there, if it's present, it's not going away, what I like to say, trust the contrarian path of your heart. Your heart will never set you wrong.
I absolutely love that. And hats off to your lovely wife who trusts your contrarian heart as well. Because I probably have said to my wife, hey, let's start a farm. And I get, no, we're not starting a farm. but hats off to your wife for trusting that contrarian heart as well. Mate, it's great to get to know you more. Likewise. And great to share that with our community. And thanks very much. And
it's been a pleasure. It's been a lot of fun.
Cheers, man.
Cheers.
So I hope you enjoyed that little interview with Ryan. One of the great things is that we've just asked Ryan to put together a course for ScoreApp users. So if you've got a ScoreApp account, you can actually log into your account, and any day now you'll find an amazing course by Ryan on how he actually did the ask method, how he turned that into a process. So the playbooks that we just discussed in that interview, all of those have been turned into templates and methods and courses. You'll find that already in your ScoreApp. So when you get a chance, log in, have a look at the course, have a look at Ryan's templates, and take the big ideas that we talked about and turn them straight into action. All the best.